do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our habits or our behaviors. I recently heard this quote on a YouTube video from a motivational speaker, and it sounds great, and there's a lot of truth to it, but it misses something really critical. What's driving our behaviors? It's not just try harder, right? Like we've all tried harder to change, right? The behavior, but we got to figure out what's driving the behavior. And oftentimes it is our beliefs. Our beliefs are a significant driving force. So in the second part of our conversation with the nutritionist coach, Daniel Davey, we're going to explore the psychology of high performance and the human element of coaching. Daniel's going to discuss with us how elite performance is less about following some rigid plan, and it's more about an athlete's identity, their self-belief, and their relationship with themselves. So he's going to draw on his experience with some phenomenally successful teams, the Dublin football team in Ireland, as well as the Leinster rugby team. He's going to explain why the most impactful coaching happens when coaches move away from giving advice, being the advice giver, and instead become facilitators. Facilitators, people who are asking questions that are helping athletes to find their own internal answers. We're going to be unpacking the 55-5 rule, facilitating versus dictating, the power of identity, amateur versus professional athletes, the differences between coaching those, and then coaching confidence, building confidence when we coach our athletes. You're going to absolutely love the second part of our conversation. I've got no doubt about it. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. For those that don't remember, my name is JP Nermit, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you grow as a leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, my weekly article, and other free culture building resources, subscribe at tocculture.com. You can also subscribe to Betsy, our other co-host's weekly newsletter, at betsybutterick.com, or follow her on Substack at Betsy Butterick. I have to ask, and I didn't ask this off air, but listening back to you on other podcasts and doing my research on you and your approach there, where 3 to 5 minutes is actually determining actions, implementable actions, and the rest of the 55 minutes is listening, understanding the person. You're talking about coaching the person there, not the problem, or coaching the person, not their nutrition, right? I mean, do you have any background in executive coaching? Because what it sounds like you do there is a lot of executive type coaching, leadership type coaching, with those types of tools that have become very, very common, more in the corporate space the last 20, 30 years.
I've always been interested in performance psychology. I've actually just started a master's in performance psychology. I don't know why I didn't start it 5-6 years ago. Like when I've started to read the papers and the frameworks, it really starts to align things so much better than just based on experience. I think to answer that succinctly, I am enormously, and I say that for effect, grateful to have a couple of pivotal influences. My dad was an extraordinary listener. His background was in theater and directing. So he needed people to not just be able to deliver their lines. They needed to connect with the character. So he had to facilitate conversations and really listen. And that was the thing growing up that I heard repeatedly about my dad. I mean, Jesus, we had our fights and he's your dad. So you're always having those battles. But when people say, no, your dad listens to me, or listened and I have conversations with him that I've never had with anybody else, you kind of think about why. So you've got that influence, and then you kind of carry that forward, and you kind of dismiss all that stuff because he's your dad, and then you carry it forward in some way to elite sport. And then you're introduced to somebody like Jim Gavin, who helped Dublin to win 5 All-Irelands in a row through a model of team first, and through this philosophy that if the players don't understand how to make the right decisions under pressure, in the game when there's the heat of the lights, the fans are going crazy, and there's the weight of legacy on their shoulders. If they can't make those decisions, how are they going to be successful? So how can they execute if they're dependent on what he says? So that kind of those exposures, and there are many, helped me to differentiate what is so important. And I said something earlier about how people feel. People need to feel that they are capable of achieving what their dreams are and what their goals are. And I realized that if I try to get into their heads or tell them what to do, I'm getting in the way of that. You're getting in the way. You're not helping. So building people's self-belief, confidence, and their sense of self-esteem and capability is where it's at, and that's what gives me the greatest fulfillment.
There's knowing and there's the ability to do. And you see this observational listening that your father had that evoked in people to just share, like you said, with it where they hadn't shared before. There's leadership styles that you've observed, and you're like, okay, what's the hardest part for you about making that shift from, okay, knowing I need to be a great listener, I need to hold space, I need to be curious, and then actually putting that into action?
Just to clarify, the hardest part,
Yeah.
knowing that that's not what people want. That's what's the hardest part. And when you come to the end of a session and people have agreed with you and nodded their heads throughout the 55 minutes and then say, can you just tell me what to do?
Mm.
So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but what I'm ultimately saying is that there's a process in that conversation where you recognize that there's a timing element. People really need to be ready. And you need to do an incredible job of clarifying throughout that conversation that this is not about following a specific detailed plan, and it is about them creating that system for themselves. So I am here to help, to educate, and to support, and to facilitate that conversation. But you need to be able to step back and take the time in order to understand you, your needs, your behaviors, your barriers, your opportunities. So the challenge is that takes considerable time. And the easiest thing to do is to give people what they want.
No, I can resonate with that for sure.
Does it answer your
What
question?
it does, it does. It's being in those conversations, and they just want that advice giving. They just want you to tell them the solution, and it's almost like you're allowing them to suffer. And you might feel like that they're thinking, oh, well, he knows the answer, and yet you truly don't know the answer, right? And the second that we move to a place where I think I have the answer, the key to unlock this block for them, I probably am wrong.
Honestly, that has happened so many times where I've had to say, you telling me about that walk in the woods, or you telling me about that system that you use, whether it be the diary, or you're going to that place in your house, or stepping outside to go to the back shed. How am I going to figure that out? I don't have a crystal ball. People have the answers. People have the answers. They have, and what they need is the reassurance that that is the way to approach this. Now, what I find is incredibly challenging within all of this is that I know a lot of practitioners in my space who they have a process where you have your consultation, it's a 45-minute consultation, and your follow-ups are 30 minutes, and then there's emails and just all that. Like, I recognize how critical the accountability part of all of this is. But this particular approach, I say to people, I want to remember our last conversation, which means I can't have 50 of them a week.
Mhm.
So I don't know where that all sits. I know it's not. It goes back to that sense of, is the person being heard, and is the conversation at a level that they feel that we are addressing those root reasons that are blocking the behaviors, and that takes time.
Yeah, and if all we are is giving information and doing programming, then I mean, really, at this point, you can do that through an AI robot these days, right? So you have to bring a human element to what we're doing for sure. Here's a theoretical question: we've got listeners on this podcast that are professional coaches, or might as well be in a professional setup. NCAA Division One is, in many ways, is professional, and then we got a lot of amateur coaches. Right, you've been in both environments with Dublin football. There's amateur athletes. Those athletes train like professionals, and yet they have real jobs. They're teachers. They're roofers. They're, any other career people. And then you've been in Leinster rugby, where you have professional rugby players. So when you look at those, what changes for you in those different environments when you move from a professional to an amateur environment, if anything?
Yeah, it's something that I've had to think about and manage quite, I suppose, quite carefully over the time, because I don't know if this is an Irish thing or a GA thing, or if this is universal. But first of all, when you're talking about amateur athletes want to be there. They're giving up their time voluntarily, so they're not being paid. They're also working. I'm just pointing out the really obvious things that's a part of this. So if they need physiotherapy, if they need to, in some way, even if they need to change their kit, or they need to prioritize a recovery session, they are giving up time and money. That's what's happening. So in elite sport, the expectations on every level are higher. So you need to adapt to that, even in how you practice and how you behave. And I guess just being very honest about it as well, there isn't the same level of gratitude for how you, like, certainly openly, there's not the same level of gratitude. And you don't always walk into work every day going, getting this high five, or even a hug, because you're at work. So there's the expectations of the environment. You doing your job, you are expected to do that job. You're expected to turn up on time with a positive energy and a smile on your face. So that's one aspect of it. And then there's how you cater your information. Budgets are different. Players' own money is different. And the things like management of schedules, where somebody could be a parent, and they're working long hours and they're trying to play, you're having to adjust the expectations around what they need to do. So we take a very, very simple thing like hydration and meeting your hydration needs. I can remember on the same day being in Leinster and Dublin, and somebody failing a hydration test. So, well, we say failing, they were dehydrated. Let's not use the word fail, but they weren't hydrated for training. One of them was, they just weren't paying attention. The water filter is in the cafe, where they're at. breakfast is available, and they're sitting there on their phone, and they haven't consumed enough water. The other athlete, he's been on the road for 6 hours that day, going from meeting to meeting. And he's come in, he's had some water, but underestimated his needs because he's been in an office. It's been hot in the car. He's been sweating more than normal. He hasn't had a chance to change his clothes, or, he's been rushing to training. So we're talking about different types of strategies. Again, understanding that athlete, and also a little bit more of, okay, that's been a rough day. We need to think about how we can get you hydrated for this session, and you need to make sure that you've got electrolytes in your bottle as you're warming up. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, that's very nuanced, but it's trying to it's a different mentality, and then applying different strategies.
All right, we will be right back to our conversation with Daniel in just a moment. But first, I'm going to take a quick second to talk to you about the environment that you're building as a leader. So we talk a lot about on the podcast, the human element, like this idea that to truly impact performance, we have to coach the person, not just the problem. Now, if that resonates with you, I want to invite you to the TOC coach community. This is a space designed specifically for coaches who are tired of the box ticking approach and are ready to create deep systemic change in their teams. The best part, TOC Coach is completely free to join. You'll find a supportive network of coaches who are navigating similar challenges that you are facing. Now, for those of you that are really dedicated, the ones who have a truly transformational mindset and want to go deeper, I'd love for you to consider upgrading to premium. As a premium member, you'll get complete access to all 12 of our specialized courses to help you master every pillar of performance, coaching, culture, and leadership. It will also give you entry to all our live trainings where we unpack these concepts in real time. You'll also get personalized consulting for your specific team so we can help you apply these strategies directly to your context, to your unique environment, because everyone's context is different. Now, whether you're in the free community or premium member, our goal is going to help you feel capable and confident and convicted in the incredible work that you're doing. So head on over to tocculture.com to join TOC Coach today. Now let's get back to Daniel and our discussion on identity and the complexity of behavioral change.
Daniel, I wonder if I could ask a bit of a deeper question here. And if this doesn't make sense, we'll just cut it from the episode. But as you were talking a little bit about, I heard you use this phrase, relationship with food. And when you are learning and you're listening to a client, what the phrase that comes to mind or comes up for me is you're in some ways trying to identify their relationship to self as well. And when I think about that in a coaching context, even as an athletic coach, I'm often sort of walking this space between what is the athlete's relationship to the game and their relationship to the self. And I wonder if you could just maybe unpack a little bit about what those phrases mean and maybe kind of what you think about that.
I suppose about 6 years ago, I started to reflect a lot on the idea of identity, and identity as a performer, identity as an athlete. And I guess a little bit of context around this is that I joke, but this is true, that if somebody said, "Oh, Daniel Davey, he's the lad that he played with Ballyboden, the footballer," I'd be like, "Yes, that's me." Whereas that's not what I'm known for. I'm not known for sport. I'm known for working with the two top teams, and I think as I process my own identity and I process like how hard I train, I still train really hard, and I connect the behaviors and those actions for 22 years in playing sport, training, nutrition, the work I do in order to prepare with Daniel Davey, the performer. So without straying too much off into the expectation and the pressure that brings, very often the identity part is something that can be a challenge. Like an athlete mightn't even be as conscious of all of these things, but these behaviors are very strongly connected to identity. So body image, we have to bring it up even within that context, because even within male sport, it is something that I'm dealing with on a regular basis, where I had a young athlete have one of the best seasons he's ever had because of a focus on a positive mindset, self-talk, and using food really positively towards his preparation in order to perform. So he had the energy to perform in training and to recover. But he saw a photo of himself of one of the games, and the jerseys were tight, and he really didn't like how he looked. And it derailed those positive behaviors. Now, I am not saying like he ended up with one of the reasons he had the conversation with me is because he was injured. Now, I'm not saying that those behaviors and changing the behaviors linked to that it could be totally coincidental. But what I am saying is that the relationship, food has the potential to go both ways. It has the potential to energize and make you feel really good. But you have to feel good about yourself, and you have to connect very clearly eating behavior with performance. And what can happen is if you don't, and if you think about food in this more controlling way, or in this almost way that it needs to be reduced, it has the potential not only to affect that performance level, but also sabotage yourself, your behaviors. And this cycle is very vicious in how it continues. And it's very hard to stop that. So getting a sense of that and where people, how it sits, people can, I know I've brought an awful lot of elements into that from my own personal experience, but I guess that was the most important point that I left out. My relationship with food, and you talked about earlier about did I change as a person? I couldn't even compare my mindset now to where food sits and how comfortable I am with nutrition and its connection to performance versus where I was when I was at my peak, where it was about control and where every single thing was analyzed.
So how do you help people have that identity shift? How do you help them to improve that relationship with food?
First of all, it's awareness. It's about understanding, going right back to where we started. What are we looking to achieve? What do you want? What do you want as a person, and what do you want as a performer? So if I think about my own transition, my own behaviors slipped a little bit when I moved out of playing elite sport. Didn't have the routine, didn't have the structure, didn't have the identity, and I needed to reshape that vision and that identity to being a role model, and to living what I believe. And who am I to really stand in front of somebody or put out videos to thousands of people if I'm not 100% true to myself in the belief of food and its potential to do such great positive things? So it's a it's first of all, it's about understanding where are these emotions coming from and what are influencing them. And I don't know how far we go with this, but childhood is a huge influence and variable when it comes to people's positioning on food. I am incredibly fortunate that I had a very positive influence from both parents and grandparents, but it's not always like that. And like it happens, it's maybe not weekly, but it happens a couple of times a month where I will ask clients about what it was like when they were growing up. What was the experience like? How were meals structured? And what were your parents' own relationship with food? what was their own relationship with nutrition and their own bodies. And very often it starts to hit them that that's something that is a variable or is a factor. So when you're asking about where to help, that's the starting point. And then it's about reframing and reconnecting these behaviors to the identity that they want to create. And now, if you think about where we've got the conversation, we can recognize just the complexity of these things. Because can you imagine if that conversation never happens? Imagine if that person never really takes the pause, or there isn't somebody to have that conversation with, that those behaviors continue. So reflection, writing, conversation, discussion, and constantly reassuring, but also getting athletes to recognize the action of having breakfast or a snack before training, hydrating, recovering, building the self-awareness and the evidence for these behaviors, and them performing really well. That's a process that takes weeks, months, and sometimes years.
Just for the sake of clarity here, is there a difference between identity and self-image, or you've used the phrase body image? Do you tease those apart? Or are those the same thing? What
They're
are your
separate.
take on that?
Yeah. Now, I think there's an overlap. I think that there's an overlap between identity and self-image, but I think more specifically, I think you can identify as a high performer and identify as an elite athlete and not have body image issues. Whereas when you start to look at body image and behavior, then it's a lot more about how are we eating, how are we training, how are we moving, how are we behaving, and are these actions does body image come in to the consciousness and to the mindset when we're eating, when we're having these behaviors? So they are slightly different. But I guess why I'm saying that there's such an overlap is I have seen where body composition analysis is a big aspect of elite sport. And towards the end of my time, there's some research done on well-being in elite sport, and body image came up as the number one pressure and stressor in male elite sports. So we know that the analysis and sometimes the pressure and expectation, those are the type of things that can lead, if it's badly managed, to the extra pressures and stressors around body image.
I want to ask a question here that there's so much wisdom you have here and so much experience in helping people to make drastic changes in their behavior. And probably one of arguably the most difficult aspects of change in life, right? Which is to change our diet, to change our eating habits. The coaches that we work with and listening here, they're not all nutritionists, right? I don't know how many nutritionists we have listened to the podcast, but we're all trying to help people to make changes, whether it's to have a better attitude, to put more work in on a certain area of their game, whatever it be. And we run into this problem often, which is an athlete says, I have this goal, I have this dream. And we say, okay, well, what do you need to do to close the gap from where you are to where you want to be? And the athlete says, I got to do X, Y, Z. And you say, okay, what can I do to support you? And they go, yep. And you get a plan. And then you go away a few weeks and they don't make the changes. Right? They don't do what they said they were committed to do. How is a coach, take nutrition out of it, how as a coach do you work with athletes in struggling to make the changes that they desperately want to make, but just can't seem to make the change?
I will answer your question, but I will say you got to love this. I would consider myself a relatively sensitive person anyway, so that bit of context is required as I give this insight. When I was doing my master's, I was doing it over in London, and I was collecting data from the team I was playing with, and it was about the macronutrient intakes of elite GAA athletes. And I was so excited because I was getting on great with the coach. I was having a good season myself. I felt a part of the group, and this was a perfect opportunity. I think out of the whole squad, three athletes filled out a food diary for me. So here I am, the beginning of my career, going, the fuck am I doing? Am I seriously going into a career where I am doing this stuff for free? I want to help people understand. I will review your food diary and give you feedback for free. I'm part of the team. And I stood outside the dressing room. I got in. I was like, lads, like, seriously, like, you've had weeks to do this. And I came out, and one of the more senior players, one of the coach came in, he's like, you gotta calm down here. Like, these lads have never been exposed to any of this stuff, and you're expecting to fill out food diaries. Like, they just don't understand. They just don't, they just don't get it. And I think that was a massive lesson for me really early on, where it is ultimately what it's about is you're having that conversation, which is allowing, if you're engaging people on this, they're open to it. Again, all at different stages. You start from the lowest possible base. And people have this human nature. They have these reference points for success, and athletes in particular have them. They know what they can do for a 20-meter sprint or 100 meters or their 1K time. So they're phenomenal in one area. They're phenomenal catching or kicking the ball. And then they can't make scrambled eggs and toast, right? And they go, fuck that. I don't give a shite about it anyway. So, because they have, again, the identity thing, they're high achievers, and now they're shit at something. It's hard. So I have that genuine compassion and understanding for this area, because I can't speak French or I can't speak Irish. And if I was asked to speak Irish, my little girl is speaking Irish now. She's only in the Gael school for 8 weeks. I still get that like rash, that heat, that sweat if I'm asked to speak it. So what we're talking about here is the trust component, that you want to help that athlete, and I'm here when you're ready to adjust. Now, there's all different levels of that. So what I mean by that is sometimes people need a root in the hole, like they do. You do sometimes need to give people a bit of a shaking, and they respond to that. Sometimes you need to change the dynamic of the conversation. Sometimes people need a hug or need to be understood. And that's coaching, and that's why I love what I do. It's figuring out how do you shorten that period of time with that person or that athlete where they can recognize the behaviors to help themselves. And I love, it happened last week. An athlete came to me, maybe after 3 consultations in 8 months, maybe I'm a lost cause. And I said to him, you're on this call. You're on this call. You're not a lost cause. So it's going back to, afterwards they're delighted. That's just what I needed. And that's the thing. It's just keeping them connected in the conversation.
Oh, I love that. I've got like 100 more questions. I'm going to try to make one more question for myself, and then Nate, we'll try to get you out of here on a question, as we'll let you get back to the rest of your life. But one question I have for you, I think, is lifestyle, nutrition. It's a challenge in sport, even in elite sport. I was just reading Andre Agassi's book Open there last night, and he was talking about how he got nervous when French Open and chugged a pint of vodka the night before the match. But I guess the topic is alcohol, and there's no country that has a reputation for having a problem with alcohol more than Ireland. And then you put Gaelic football and you put rugby into this equation, which
Yeah.
rugby has a culture of alcohol. So here you're talking about cultural forces around, people's relationship with alcohol are very, very interesting and complex here in Ireland. How do you, as a nutritionist, a nutrition coach, how do you approach those conversations, and what have you found to be a healthy and impactful way to help reshape those relationships with alcohol?
It's changed an awful lot. The culture around alcohol has changed an awful lot. When I started, uh, athletes were drinking, coaches were drinking after all games, and then the environment shifted as well. Like the culture in Ireland and society in general, like we're drinking less alcohol. Also, the teams were successful, which meant usually it was more associated with wins. So if you're winning, really that much space for alcohol. The biggest shifts need to happen in the off season, where there was quite a bit of binge drinking and alcohol consumption was leading to slow starts in the preseason. So it was really focusing on the education around alcohol consumption. And I don't say this lightly. I love a pint and I love a glass of wine. And it massively helped with, and I'm not positioning alcohol as an enabler within my coaching. That's not what I'm saying. I just mean in terms of relatedness. Every single aspect of what I do, I I am here for you to have a conversation. I am not here to tell you not to drink. But I will say that the environment, both Dublin and Leinster, was all about facilitating leadership. It was all about facilitating good behaviors. So alcohol didn't necessarily need to be addressed because the questions were very simple. Like, is this an enabler for performance or a barrier to performance, and at what level? And I can honestly say, throughout my whole time working in both environments, I cannot honestly say alcohol was a major barrier for performance. Now, what I do, and I do want to stress this is kind of more on a wider issue. I do think we still have a long way to go to nurture a more positive, moderate behavior around alcohol. And I have a social media presence. And when I talk about alcohol consumption, I get the backlash when I talk about more moderate consumption, because it's still that kind of entwined with masculinity. And so, going back to that education point and going back to helping athletes understand, okay, so if you consume alcohol, it has the potential to not only impact your sleep and your recovery, it has the potential to impact your hormonal profile. So if you're looking to build muscle, you're looking to get stronger, produce more power, these are the type of behaviors that are going to impact that. Do you want a direct blocker in there? If you're looking to improve your body composition, alcohol is going to be an issue because you're preferentially going to use alcohol and store more calories as body fat. So all of this information, I'm armed with the science. I have all of that, no problem. But unless you can have the conversation in the first place, they're not going to listen to you.
Daniel, I want to get you out of here on this. In a lot of ways, I hope coaches in our audience can identify with a lot of the challenges in some ways that you've faced just coaching. It's a different subject, maybe than basketball or football or lacrosse or what have you, but there's a lot there that we can relate to. And I'm just curious from your experience, because you've been with some really high level teams, you've been around a lot of championship teams, been in the proximity of lots of successful athletes. At the end of the day, what's the most fulfilling thing for you as a coach?
I've done quite a few podcasts. I'm not sure I've been asked that. So genuinely nice to be put on the spot. I'm going to say there's two parts to it, right? One part is, did you do all you can do to help the athletes and the team prepare? That's an amazing feeling. If your team and group are walking onto the field or running onto the field in an All-Ireland semi-final or a Champions Cup, and you've really put your heart and soul, everything that you can do to impact them and their performance. If you've done that, that's a very fulfilling feeling, win or lose. And the next part is genuinely feeling like your role and your conversations, and I'd say I've never mentioned conversations more in a podcast, had a meaningful impact in athletes knowing how to prepare and turn up to deliver for themselves and for their team. So that's an enormous kind of just like you might say on one level a little bit selfish, because that's kind of what we want to feel a part of something, but to know that you've had a role. And I guess my dad always said that, like he used to always say, he's like, it's one thing being a part of it and it's another thing making a real impact. And that always stuck with me. So those are the kind of things that I think about.
I'm going to ask you a strange question. When you look at having those types of conversations that have that type of impact, what's the most fulfilling part about those conversations?
We've looked at, so personally and as a team, we've looked at all of the feedback that we've got over the years, so the different programs. And for me, the conversation opener is performance nutrition. That's where you come in, but the feedback is confidence. So to know that you've influenced people's confidence and self-belief is incredibly fulfilling. So you start with, as we joke, kind of, not really, but we joke about the scrambled eggs and toast and bananas and milk and the simplicity. But if people know that those the building blocks as part of their plan to perform well, that's fulfilling. That's really fulfilling. There's one thing I haven't said, and I'm very conscious of the audience again, that I think is really critical. And I feel like every time I do get an opportunity to talk, I want to mention it. And it is that you don't need to be qualified as a performance nutritionist to support really good behaviors. And that can simply mean in your organization, there being fruit baskets available, filtered water, that there's a fridge that people can put their lunches, that there's cutlery, and that there's clean plates, and maybe that is facilitated in some way. It could be as simple as a microwave for people to heat their lunch, and a space for people to enjoy food together. That this is something that's important. So even if it's sitting with your athletes at lunchtime or at breakfast and having conversation, and even if for some reason nutrition comes up about making something, or some athlete is at the table there and they've made their overnight oats, way to go. Like that is cementing good behaviors. That athlete is going home happy about his overnight oats or her overnight oats.
What you've shared today has been brilliant. What you just shared there at the end is going to be really challenging for a lot of coaches out there. I've been in environments where you walk into a group of American football coaches, for instance, or hockey coaches or basketball coaches, and their office, the coach's office, has got McDonald's wrappers all around the place. Like that, the healthy, you talked about embodying the values ourselves. I mean, we're talking about that we as coaches, we as leaders, we have to do the work ourselves in this, to be positive examples for our athletes to have a healthy relationship with food. So, what you've shared today is challenging, not just on this space of nutrition, though. It's also been really challenging for us to be better at our conversations, to be better at listening, to better at working with athletes, holding that space for them. And so I'm so grateful for you coming on here and sharing with us what is the best way for our listeners to reach out to learn more about yourself and how you might be able to support some of the work that they're doing.
Well, thank you for as an enjoyable conversation I've had, and in quite a while. I was on your website earlier this morning, and I was sending it to my own team, and I said, this is where we have to get to. So that's just to credit you for the way that you speak, how good you are at holding conversations, both of you, and how interested you are, and giving me an opportunity to talk about something I really care about, and also calling out that this is challenging. And I'm here to continue to challenge people because I know how good it is for their health and for their athletes' performance. So my current website is daveynutrition.com, and you'll get me on LinkedIn and Daniel Davey. And if there's anybody listening, I suppose this is one kind of thing I have never done before. I love experiencing new environments. So I'll just leave it there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for our conversation with Daniel Davey. I highly recommend that you check him out at daveynutrition.com. daveynutrition.com. You can learn more about his retreats, his recipes. He's got a great blog there. And then you can also look at how he might be able to serve you and your team. I can just attest that what I see in the work that he does is not just help your athletes eat healthier. He's helping build a foundation for them to build good habits in all areas of their lifestyle that are going to help to lead to better performance. Thanks again for listening to the Coaching Culture Podcast. If you haven't already, please be a subscriber, not just the podcast, but to our weekly notes. And you can do that at tocculture.com. Also, if you found today's episode valuable, I know I love the conversation. Be sure to share it. I am super excited for this one to drop. I'm going to be sharing it with loads of coaches out there. And if you get a chance, leave us a nice review wherever you listen to your podcasts.